Hi, welcome to Codeforces. This is episode 1 of Daily Dose. In this new series, we'll be covering daily coding interview questions posted every day at 7 pm. So let's move on to the first episode. Here we have a Wipro Coding Interview question, and the name of the question is Implement Me Off. Here we are given an array as input, and the example array is 84532 We have this set of numbers. There are 8 numbers in total. What we have to do with this array is we are giving this array as input to the function implementMe, and this function performs certain tasks and then gives us the result as these series of numbers. Our task here would be to complete this function implementMe, which performs this function as taking the input as an array and printing this array. Now let's move on to the explanation. Now we are at the first element, which is 8. We have two variables, smaller sum and bigger sum. Both are kept as 0 by default. So the question is, we have to find all the sum of the bigger numbers to the right of the current element. So here we are at 8. So we are taking all the elements to the right of 8. That starts from 4, that goes all the way up to 1. So in these numbers right from 4 to 1, which are the numbers that is greater than 8? We have just 9. So the bigger sum will be just 9. But the smaller sum would include 4 plus 5 plus 3 all the way up to 1. So this would be the smaller sum and just 9 will be the bigger sum. So after finding the smaller sum and bigger sum, what we have to do is we have to multiply these two values and then to store this result in the position of 8. So let us start with the first iteration. So here we are at 8. Now let's traverse this array and find the smaller sum and the bigger sum for this array. So we'll start with 4, the first element after 8. So is 4 greater than or less than 8? It is obviously lesser than 8. So we are adding it to the smaller sum. Let us move on to the next element. We have 5. 5 is smaller than 8. So obviously it will get added to the smaller sum. And like this, we move on to the next element 3. So 3 is added to the smaller sum as it is less than 8. So in this manner, we are traversing the whole array. Like we saw earlier, only the element 9 is greater than 8. So the value of bigger sum would be 9 after this iteration. And the value of smaller sum would be 12 plus 2 plus 6 plus 1, the remaining elements which are less than 8. So that would give us 12 plus 2 is 14, 14 plus 6 is 20, 20 plus 1 is 21. So the smaller sum is 21 and the bigger sum is 9. So that is the value we will get after this whole iteration. So we have these two numbers. So what do we have to do? We have to multiply these two values and store it in the position where we have 8 now. 1 is 9 and 9 2s are 18, so that will give us 189. So the product is 189. So we are storing it in the position where we have currently 8. So this array will be transformed to 189, 45, 32, 691. So we are moving to the next element. We have 4. Now we are taking all the elements in the array that is after 4, that is from 5 to 1, and we are repeating the same process again. We are having a smaller sum and we are having a bigger sum. We are finding all those values which are bigger than 4 and adding it to the bigger sum. We are finding all those values which are smaller than 4 and adding it to the smaller sum, multiplying, finding the product and then storing it in the position of 4. And I think that would give us the value of 120. So the array would become 189, 120 and then the remaining part. This same process is repeated again till we move on to the last element. So this is our program, and we'll be using two for loops in order to traverse this array and then find the sum and multiply its products and store it in its respective position. Now let's get on to the code and solve this problem. So here we have our main function. This main function includes the input, the function call and printing of the output. So the input consists of an n-sized array, so n is equal to 8 and array of n is equal to the number. So we have the exact array that we saw earlier in the explanation. So we have the function call here which calls the implementMe function and then passes these arguments to it. Our task would be to complete this function and then the printing of the array is taken care by the main function. So let us complete this implementMe function. So we are given the array and the size of the array as input. So what is the first thing that we have to do? We have to traverse this array. So how many times do we have to run this first loop? We'll run this first for loop n times, that is where n is the total length of this array, right? So for int I is equal to 0 till I is less than n, we are doing I plus plus. So that is our first for loop. So what do we write inside this for loop? We'll first have two variables as we saw, smaller sum and a bigger sum. These will be assigned to 0 by default. So int smaller sum is equal to 0 and int bigger sum is equal to 0. Okay, Now we have those two variables. What we have to do next, we have to traverse this array right from the next element to which we are pointing to. Let us say we are pointing to the first element, and then we'll be taking the array from the next element, that is the second element, till the last element, and then we have to find all the bigger values and the smaller values, right? So we'll use another for loop here. Int j is equal to I plus 1. So as we saw here, if we are at the first element, the elements that we took for bigger sum and smaller sum are the elements just to the right of the first element. So that started from 5, 4 and then the rest of the array, right? So we are not taking the element 8. So we are starting right from I plus 1 if we are pointing to I. So the for loop starts from j is equal to I plus 1 and it goes on till the end of the array. So j is less than n. We are incrementing the value of j by 1, so j plus plus. So what do we have to do inside this for loop? We have to find whether the number that we are pointing to is greater than or lesser than the value that we have. So if the array of j, that is the element that we are pointing to, is greater than array of I. So this array of I will denote the value 8 in the example that we saw, and array of j will denote the value 4 and the rest of the elements as we traverse this loop. So if this condition is true, then it means the value that we are pointing to is greater than the original value. So what we have to do, we have to add it to the bigger sum. So bigger sum plus equal to, and what do we add? We add array of j to it. So array of j is added to the bigger sum. Now let's move on to the else clause. This else clause will be executed when array of j is less than or equal to the given number. So in that case, we will be adding it to the smaller sum. So smaller sum plus equal to array of j. And this code will complete the evaluation of the bigger sum as well as the smaller sum. So all we have to do now is we have to multiply the bigger sum by the smaller sum and then store that value in the original position that we saw. So 8 were replaced by 21 cross 9, which was 189, right? So similarly, we are replacing array of I by the product of bigger sum and smaller sum. So bigger sum multiplied by the smaller sum is stored in the array of I position. So this would complete the total program. Now let's run this code and verify our output. So here we are, our output. 189, 120 and the rest of the array. As we can see here, the last two digits are 0. As we don't have any other element that is to the right of the last element, we'd have the default value of bigger sum and the smaller sum as 0. So the product of 0 times 0 is 0, and hence the value of 0 is being stored in those positions. And that is the solution to this problem. So let me know in the comments below what is the output that we'll get if we pass the array 1, 2, 3 in the implementMe of function. If you love this video, please drop a like and comment down below if you have any questions. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow by 7 in the next episode. Until then, bye bye.